Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Nashtaprayesha Padarishu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Nashtati. We're continuing the Srimad Bhagavatam and 1 chapter 8. We read chapter 22, so we're on text 23. 1:8:23. Pita Prishikesh Kalena Devaki Kamsena Ruddha Tachirang Shuchardita Vimochitahang Chasama Sahatmaja Vipo Tvayaiva Nathena Muhurvi Padganat. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Jai.
Translation. O Hrishikesha, Master of the senses and Lord of lords, you have released your mother Devaki, who was long imprisoned and distressed by the envious king Kamsa, and me and my children from a series of constant dangers. Purport. Devaki, the mother of Krishna and sister of King Kamsa, was put into prison along with her husband, Vasudeva, because the envious king was afraid of being killed by Devaki's eighth son, Krishna. He killed all the sons of Devaki who were born before Krishna, but Krishna escaped the danger of child slaughter because he was transferred to the house of Nanda Maharaj, Lord Krishna's foster father. Kunti Devi, along with her children, was also saved from a series of dangers. But Kunti Devi was shown far more favor because Lord Krishna did not save the other children of Devaki, whereas he saved the children of Kunti Devi. This was done because Devaki's husband, Vasudeva, was living, whereas Kunti Devi was a widow and there was none to help her except Krishna. The conclusion is that Krishna endows more favor to a devotee who is in greater dangers. Sometimes he puts his pure devotees in such dangers because in that condition of helplessness, the devotee becomes more attached to the Lord. The more the attachment is there for the Lord, the more success is there for the devotee. Om Jnana Timirantasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshna Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschati Deshatarane Vachakalpatarupshascha Kripasindhubhyahe Vacha Patitanam Bhavebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhaktivedanta. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare,
Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare.
Rishikesha Kalena Devaki Kamsena Ruddha Tichirang Shuchardita Vimochitahang Cha Sahatmaja Vipo Tvayaiva Nathena Mahurva Padganat. O Hrishikesha, Master of the senses and Lord of lords, you have released your mother Devaki, who was long imprisoned and distressed by the envious king Kamsa, and me and my children from a series of constant dangers. So, Srimati Kunti Devi has talked about how Krishna is beyond the senses, but he descends at his own mercy, and the power of his pastimes. And now, so today she's talking about specifically how he's interacted with her, and also with Devaki, his birth mother, who's a contemporary of Kunti's. So the Mahabharata, which contains the Bhagavad Gita, it's where we find the details of the story of Kunti how she attained the favor of various demigods and by them had several sons, and um, her marriage to Pandu, the upbringing of the Pandavas, Yudhishthir, Bhima, Arjuna, Nakula, and Sahadev, um, Pandu's death, her co-wife Madri's um, leaving her body with their husband, and Kunti's raising the five Pandavas on her own, and the who they are, who these Pandavas are, what their moral character is, what their relationship with Krishna is. It's all in the Mahabharata. All of it leads up to the Bhagavad Gita. So there's a lot there. There's over 100,000 verses in the Mahabharata. But the essence of Kunti's story is that she completely relied on Krishna, and all of her sons too relied on Krishna. They were very, for the purposes of a story like that, which is meant to attract the minds of, the residents of Kali Yuga, they are the good guys. They're very much the good guys. And the Kauravas, although related by blood, and although the Kuru dynasty included such exalted, even great devotees like Bhishma, were, for the purposes of the Mahabharata, the bad guys. And the reason for that is, although there was so much moral gray area and there were so many, even great devotees on the side of the Kauravas, fundamentally the Kauravas refused to actually try to understand what Krishna wanted and dedicate themselves to that, whereas the Pandavas always did that. And so that's like a great summary of what Kunti and her sons went through, because although they were the rightful heirs to the throne when Pandu died, Yudhishthir, the eldest, and the, by all accounts, very, very exalted and qualified prince to take that position of leadership, was not allowed to do so. And their family was put into so many troubles. They were exiled. There were many assassination attempts. There was a lot of various kinds of injustice, and it wasn't just a matter of, well, this is a thing that's supposed to go one way, but it's not going that way. This person's supposed to be doing that job, but they're not. A lot of people will rely on that. When there's a leadership position, and unqualified people are in leadership, it's not just an abstract moral principle that, well, it would be nice if there was, if we can kind of cross that T and dot that I, if we did this by the book, because it affects everybody. If somebody is in a position of leadership and they're corrupt, it affects actually everybody that they're leading, because where are they drawing their funds from? What are they doing with their power? Who does it affect? Who's making the laws? It's an incredibly important position. And you actually, according to Shastra, as a leader, for example, as a political leader, as an administrator, you accept a fraction of the karma of every single person who is under your leadership. That is what you're saying you're going to do. I will accept, I think it's an eighth of the karma of every single person under my leadership. And I will do my best to actually help them. So it's like, there's a relationship. There's a very, very intimate relationship between the leadership and those who follow. It's supposed to be like a father and their children. It's supposed to be very, very paternalistic, very careful, very, very loving. How much care does a parent put into seeing that their child gets educated, gets fed, gets a nice partner, develops moral character? That much interest should be there from leadership. If you ever look at the pictures of like political leaders after 4 years or whatever their term would happen to be, what their face looks like after 4 years, that's not 4 years of aging. That's not 4 years of their own karma. That's 4 years of accepting the karma of a country, right? It's an incredible, who knows how good of a job they've done to actually meet their responsibility. So the injustice of Yudhishthira not taking the throne was, it's very poignantly pointed out in the Mahabharata as being a travesty, a great crime. And the crimes against her family were numerous. But despite that, they just kept taking shelter of Krishna. And Kunti was a widow. It's very poignant because her co-wife, Madri, had two sons, Nakula and Sahadev, by their husband. She had three. And when Pandu died, neither of them wanted to live. But they decided, well, one of us will stay alive and raise the children, and the other one will go. So she was completely on her own. She didn't remarry. And she was facing this political intrigue. She was facing assassination attempt. She was facing exile, all these things. And her devotion it's described by the Acharyas as being practically on the level of the goddess of fortune. Kunti's devotion for Krishna is remarkable. And so her life is emblematic. The life of the Pandavas is emblematic of this devotion. And what we're hearing about here basically is this dynamic of Krishna putting his devotees into hell, a situation of helplessness, or you could almost say like the benefit of feeling helpless as a devotee of Krishna, because Devaki is emblematic of that. With everything she went through, it was very natural to feel completely helpless. And this is Leela, because she's an eternal associate of Krishna. There's a way in which she's demonstrating what helplessness looks like when that's connected to complete surrender. Because otherwise, how would we know, right? If the lives of the devotees, the pure devotees, were like all peaches and cream, rainbows and unicorns, what would we know about actually taking shelter of Krishna and feeling helpless? How would that relate to us? We would have some kind of inflated artificial idea. Oh, if I serve Krishna, then immediately everything in my life will be completely beautiful. And he'll take care of all my problems. And I don't actually have to apply myself at all, is really the lesson. I don't have to do anything internally. There's no internal work. Because basically, as conditioned souls, all we want is external happiness anyway. And if you're telling me that I could just practice Krishna consciousness right now, and all my material desires are met, then I'll just do that. Because that's all I wanted anyway. There's no internal work of getting over your material desires. There's no internal work of actually trying to develop a relationship with Krishna. It becomes very, very superficial. And so that is not how the devotees of the Lord generally play out their lives in any tradition. Was it easy for Jesus Christ? Was it easy for St. Francis of Assisi? Was it easy for anybody in any tradition who's a bona fide saint? Generally not. It's generally very difficult. If they're very advanced, then Krishna is like, okay, I'm going to use you to make some points, because he knows they can handle it. Kunti Devi could go through this and not be like, you know what, I'm done. I'm done chanting. I'm done. No, because she is who she is. She can actually handle this and keep serving Krishna. I couldn't handle that. I'm not such a great devotee. I couldn't go through that and be an example for the world. I couldn't make the pages of the Mahabharata. Therefore, I'm not used in that way necessarily. But we see the devotees in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in Vrindavan, in the Mahabharata, in you name your tradition. These great devotees, if they're really, really pure in their devotion, they will be used for that point, because we need to learn what it looks like to actually take shelter. Bhakti is a big lesson in taking shelter. And for the conditioned soul, taking shelter feels very unnatural. It feels very unnatural because we don't do it. We don't practice it. We avoid it. It's actually contrary to our disease. It's contrary to our practice of trying to be the shelter for others, trying to be independent in the center. You don't take shelter if you are the shelter, right? Which is why material leaders have all those wrinkles on their face after 4 years, because they're trying to be the shelter. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. The only way you can be the shelter, even temporarily, as a leader, as a parent, as anything, is by taking shelter of higher power. You can do that. That's how you can function properly in that respect. As a spiritual leader, as a parent, as a teacher, as a president, you have to know what's expected of you by higher power and take shelter there. And then you can be giving shelter to others. But the conditioned soul doesn't want to do that. They're not used to that. So we have to actually have a curriculum to learn how to take shelter. We have to actually recognize that I'm helpless. And that may or may not involve actually becoming very tangibly helpless in our lives, right? We may not be Kunti, but there are going to be moments generally where everybody at some point will feel, oh, wow, I'm actually really helpless in this world. I don't have hardly any power at all. And usually those moments, they pass, but those are very powerful, teachable moments. And so we find generally, if you have conversations with devotees, you'll find that they started practicing bhakti because they felt powerless and helpless. They felt they didn't know what to do. They didn't have answers. Things weren't going their way. There was a sense of alienation. There's a sense of isolation. Those things are really common in the lives of devotees. And the lila of them coming to start practicing bhakti, because that's a powerful motivator. It's a fire underneath you. It moves you. I talked to a devotee astrologer who practices the ancient science of Jyotish, and he was talking about some of the details of Jyotish. And so there are these mahadashas, there's these longer stretches of your life. There's like, um, they're ruled by the moon, the sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Rahu, and Ketu, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's all of them. So that's like 9. And so they're like 6 to 14 years in length. And people go through them in their lives. And generally, what he found was there was a disproportionate number of people who came to Krishna consciousness in the Rahu period, because there's so much alienation in Rahu. There's so much sense of, I don't belong here. And it's very, although Rahu is extremely not auspicious for material things. Both Rahu and Ketu, both Rahu and Ketu are quite auspicious for transcendental activity. And so devotees often start in this life practicing again, who knows how many lives they've been practicing bhakti, because they become motivated by their own present lack of comfort, lack of answers, lack of belonging. And materially, those things come and go. Belonging, comfort, wealth, happiness, they're always there sometimes to some degree, and then they're not there. There's like high points and peaks and troughs. Sometimes you feel completely on top of the world and absolutely unbeatable. And your false ego of like, I'm actually totally in control is completely supported. And sometimes it's the opposite. But when it's the opposite, then we start to actually like bend and let Krishna in. So what happens if we're not in a trough? Then too bad for us. We have to wait for our lives to become unmanageable messes before we take shelter. Well, Krishna's not going to do that to us. He's not going to be like, well, you all have to personally suffer like the Pandavas did. You can actually learn from the example of others. So Kunti's going through that wasn't because she needed to learn how to practice Krishna consciousness. She didn't need to learn how to practice Krishna consciousness. I need to learn. And reading about that, reading about Arjuna, reading about his despair on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, his feeling of helplessness, his inability to solve the fundamental problems of life on his own, reminds me that I actually have the same problem. I am unable to solve the problems of life on my own. I will always be unable to solve the problems of life on my own. I have always been unable, and there's nothing I can do about that independently. But I can do what Arjuna did. I can listen, and I can learn, and I can take shelter of Krishna. So that's why they go through it, to teach us. They're acharyas. They're teaching by example. They're not teaching because they have to learn themselves. They're teaching by example. So this helplessness is actually our fundamental condition. Mahatma Prabhu was talking about chanting in a mode to recognize, to remember, I'm actually just an insignificant particle of dust. That's all I am. That's all I've ever been and all I'll ever be. And actually, that's joyful. That's wonderful. I just want to reclaim that and let go of these false pretenses of being something great and powerful on my own, because that's just creating problems for me. And chanting in that mode of like, Krishna, remind me, like you put a reminder on your phone, remind me. Krishna, please remind me. Help me to understand who I really am as a small being under your shelter, and not to forget that. Because what I can see in my life is when I do forget it, I spiral out for goodness knows how long, and it just creates problems. And when I come to again, I'm like, what have I been doing? What have I been doing with this sense of that I'm independent again? And so please let me remember. And so helplessness is part of that. And so there's training around that. There's training in terms of trying to even hear about helplessness. At first, you hear about, well, actually, you're helpless. And it sounds like, what are you talking about? What a disempowering message. What is this Krishna consciousness? What is this bhakti yoga? You're telling people to just like stop trying? No, because in material life, we think either you're trying to take charge of your life or you're not. You're giving up, right? You're surrendering. Like someone raises the white flag. Surrender means like, I give up. Conquering nation, come take whatever you want. Pillage me, loot me. I'm done. You know, I'm the loser. You're the victor. That's what we think. We think black and white like that. Either I'm enjoying the world or I'm renouncing the world. Either I'm here with a spoon at the buffet, trying to cram as much as I can and be like, this is all for me, you know? Or I'm saying, I'm done and leave and just give up. Karma, gyan. Bhoga, tyaga. Enjoyment, renunciation. This is material life. You have two choices. That's it. So people generally hear about bhakti. They think this is just renunciation. This is just living on a mountaintop. Take a vow of silence. You're celibate. No more pleasure for you. This is because it's not worth it. And so maybe they're interested in that. If they're actually going through enough suffering, they may think that's actually appropriate. But that's not bhakti. And generally, people are not interested in renunciation because it strikes them as painful. And one of the hardest things you can ask anybody to do is give up pleasure. You know, people will take any kind of austerity if it gives them a deeper pleasure. They sacrifice for their children. Why? Because they actually get so much more. They sacrifice for their country. Why? Because it's more important than what they're giving up. So the idea, though, of giving up pleasure is actually foreign to them because it's not real for us. We don't actually give up pleasure in bhakti. We may give up a short-term pleasure and get something much deeper. So there's a lesson, there's a curriculum in the bhakti process of starting to actually make friends with this idea of being helpless, this idea of taking shelter, this idea of accepting higher power, of being guided, because it's very uncomfortable because of our preconceptions, because of our misunderstandings. So the example externally of Kunti, the Pandavas, the Vrindavan Vasis, Radharani, Srila Prabhupada, and then, the devotees around us who may not be Srila Prabhupada, but are also just exemplifying bhakti in a greater way than we are in our own lives. So we can look at them as an external example. Okay, this is what it looks like to practice helplessness and become really exalted, really happy, really pure, all the things I'd like to be. And then there's our own internal practice of trying to put into practice helplessness, trying to step into that, sink into that reality, which is eternally true, but we always have a choice of actually embracing it or not, whether we're externally being bombarded by Maya, suffering, or we're externally kind of comfortable. We can, in our japa, we can, in our heart, sink into Krishna, I'm just your servant. Remind me of that. And he can actually give us that. He can, at any moment, he can remind us of that in a sweet way. So we're taking all these external guides and we're also trying to follow internal guidance, that Krishna in our heart is able to show us the sweetness of being helpless, the sweetness of relying on him, the sweetness of surrender, the joy of that, the natural quality of that. It's not unnatural, Prahlad Maharaj says this. He says in the 7th canto, when talking to his friends, at recess, they were in school. The school was run by first-class materialists, teaching the kids how to be also materialists. And here he is talking Krishna consciousness. He said, actually, the relationship we have with the divine is the most natural and sweet thing. It's the most natural and sweet thing, and actually engaging in it is the most natural and joyful thing, right? Because here they are, they don't know anything about bhakti. It can seem like, oh, this is very artificial. You worship this Krishna, or you worship this, whatever your name for God is. It could seem very artificial because we're very externally oriented. We're very shallow as living entities because of our conditioning. We see spirituality, we think of it in terms of the language they're speaking, the clothes they're wearing, the food they're eating. We think this is spirituality, right? You have to eat these ways, look these ways, dance these ways, do the externals, and that's spirituality. And it's like, no. That's why it becomes like, there's all these like, what's the word? people will use the externals as a substitute for surrender, right? They'll see the externals and say, like, I don't want this. I don't want this. I'm not about that. This is not me. But it's just a way of avoiding the deeper aspects of any bhakti tradition, which is this: feeling oneself helpless, actually recognizing that I'm not in charge here. I've never been, and I'm never going to be in charge here. And I'm never actually happy until I'm connected to that higher power. Right? Which means acknowledging that I'm small and they're great. Right? And so we shy away from it. So people will raise all kinds of fuss. They'll complain about religion. They'll talk about how it's ruining the world. They'll you know, find so many straw men to beat, to distract themselves from the fact that every single spiritual tradition that's actually a real spiritual tradition, not just some cult invented by former sci-fi writers. I'm sorry, L. Ron Hubbard. I have to say that.
Scientology.
Every actual spiritual tradition in the history of time has been saying the same thing. We belong to Source, and we're only truly happy and fulfilled connected to Source. And no amount of straw man, no amount of avoiding that point and pointing the finger at this problem or this abuse or this contradiction or this hypocrisy can change that. That is the actual historical truth of every spiritual tradition. And at this point, trillions of practitioners. And we need to keep hearing it because it's so salient. It is so relevant right now in this moment, 2025. It'll be relevant next year. It'll be relevant in the next yuga. There'll be plenty of conditioned souls who need to hear that. And so Krishna comes again and again. His devotees are giving the example again and again. In all these traditions, the message is there again and again. We're helpless, but it's actually sweet. Please come and taste that with us. Please come and experience that. Don't just imagine it. Don't figure it out on your own terms. Let Krishna show you what it feels like to be held by him, right? Can anybody relate to this? Like trying to be like the man. So I'm trying to be powerful. I'm trying to be in control. That's what society tells me I have to do. That's the great American dream. That's the great modern dream. Not just American. It's the modern dream. And it's like, at some point you just admit, I just want to be held. I just want someone to take care of me. Can't I just be under someone else's care? Why do I have to be in control all the time? It's not working, right? Because we're not the supreme masculine. He's the controller. We're the feminine. We're actually meant to be under his care. We're meant to be guided. We're meant to be in his hands, held. That is such a relief. That is where we feel natural, feel aligned. However, you're externally identifying with gender, that is, or spiritually, that is our real relationship to this world and to the divine. We're contained. We're not the container. We're held. We're not the holder. And that's what bhakti is. It's sinking into that. So Kunti lived that. Arjuna lived that. All of her sons lived that. And so this is just a callback to all those pastimes in the Mahabharata, to what we see from her son Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. And it's a callback even to Devaki. Devaki showed it too. And those are just some thoughts on the universality of that bhakti experience across traditions, the universality of our helplessness, the universal applicability of that for everybody. It's not just that Kunti was helpless, but I'm not. No, we all are. We actually all are. There are no exceptions. It's only if you want to embrace it or not. So bhakti, yeah, again, I was mentioning bhakti is this process of becoming comfortable with and acquainted with helplessness and becoming trained. It's a curriculum in surrender. So please reflect back for me anything you heard so I can remember it and reconnect with that truth myself. Om Tat Sat.
Love that bhakti is a curriculum in surrender, and that we're contained, not the container. We are held, not the holder. Right?
Yeah.
And that helpless. It's an interesting word, and I think that the way I've related to that for much of my life is like, I'm not helpless. I have, I have free will and I have that. I can be empowered by Krishna, but I can be empowered and I'm I've heard even in 12-step recovery programs, like I'm not helpless, I'm powerless. And so to understand that, like to hand over the control to a power greater than me, to Krishna, and that I can like make choices. I have that ability. So like I'm not entirely helpless, right? But the way you were describing helpless is from a different vantage point, right? Is from this like um if I can get that, like Mahaprabhu was speaking about in the chop affirmation, if I can understand that I'm an insignificant particle at Krishna's lotus feet, that doesn't mean that I'm worthless. That doesn't mean that I'm
Yeah.
right. It's
Did
like
did Kunti have,
low
self-esteem
self-esteem.
problems?
No,
No. Was
and that's where
Kunti
it gets confused.
was she non-dynamic? Did you just sit there kind of like, okay, whatever you want, Krishna, I'm just gonna lie here? Did Arjuna, like, after hearing the Bhagavad Gita, like, okay, Krishna, you take care of it, I'll just sit here. Prabhupada joked, he said,
Right.
Arjuna didn't say after hearing the Bhagavad Gita, okay, I will sit and smoke ganja. Krishna, you do what you like. Devotees are very dynamic. So
Right.
yeah, there's
So there's that not wanting to equate the two in that way of like to get into a tamasic state,
right.
of like,
Which we have some familiarity with. We've all been
yeah,
in tamas.
yeah,
We're like, I can't be bothered.
right,
That's not bhakti.
right.
That's why there's a curriculum.
Yeah, I like the
That's
way
why
you
there have,
describe that.
yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
That's why we have to see it in action. Otherwise, we imagine these things
Right,
according to our mode of nature. We imagine it.
right. So
Right.
that state of helplessness doesn't make you give up, but rather to call out for Krishna and to
Mhm.
give in to Krishna and say, okay, you're the container and I want to be contained within you. And
Yeah, actually, helplessness, even materially, helplessness helps you find your greatest resources.
mhm,
Desperation, actual need. It's like the power of a deadline.
yeah.
I get all my best work done under a deadline.
Yeah,
It's just,
like the pressure's on.
yeah. If it weren't for the 11th hour, I wouldn't get anything done. It's the old adage. So that's helplessness. It's like I need there's an exam in 2 hours. I need to know what I'm doing. Those 2 hours of cramming you're gonna get are the most condensed cramming you're gonna get in 2 hours.
Mhm,
Um, that's helplessness. When you actually stop living in procrastination, you have to give up, Thomas. You have to give up, ignorance and actually accept if I don't deal with this right now, it's a problem. This is urgent. This is an urgent problem. And
mhm,
then you start to do it really seriously. So that's what the Shastra is saying. That's what Kunti's life is saying. We have an urgent problem right now that we're overlooking
mhm.
over and over and over again. And it's a chronic disease at this point. The doctor looks you in the eye and says, you have an urgent problem. If you don't change how you're living, you're going to die, right? You're going to die like probably by the end of the week. Then you take it seriously,
Mhm.
I would think.
Yeah.
That's what it means to be helpless. It's like recognize reality and work with it
Mhm.
instead of fighting it.
Mhm. Thanks.
What else did you hear?
I just think it's interesting when as you talk to each new devotee that you meet and you hear their origin story, like how did they get into bhakti? And, there's a large majority of people that went through big stuff to, really big stuff before they got here. And that's why they got here. Either they, were desperate and reached out and found it, or they just cleared space and it happened upon them. But I do find it interesting. There's some that feel like how do you explain that with the people that are just seekers? There's other people. I mean, maybe that's a helplessness of its own, of the people that were just like really, really young seekers. And so help me just talk about that a little bit if you don't mind.
Sure. In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7, verse 15 and 16, Krishna talks about those who don't take shelter from those who do. And I think in verse 16, he gives 4 different categories. Chaturvida bhajante mam jana sukritino jana artha jignasa artati jnani cha paratarshaka. That those who are suffering may be motivated by, I'm suffering right now. They may be motivated by, I want wealth. I need more. I don't have enough. Poverty. They may be motivated by curiosity, intellectual curiosity, or they may be motivated by a strong desire to actually know the Supreme, which is distinguished from curiosity. There's 4 categories there. And he says, any of them, because they take shelter of me, even if they're motivated by one of those things or more, I consider them great. But of all of them, the one who's actually trying to understand me as I am, I consider non-different from my own self. Because I give myself to them and they give themselves to me. But what we find is that regardless of the reason why someone comes to bhakti, they can continue to practice bhakti. And by continuing to practice bhakti, they become more and more pure in their intentions, right? If you come in the door thinking like, I'm so tired of being poor, this is like classic Kali Yuga spirituality. It's like, come to our church and we'll make you rich. Like worship God and you'll become. That's like a motivation people have for worshiping God, right? But that's not a motivation that Krishna wants you to keep holding on to. And so the practice of bhakti itself purifies one of these things. But the seeker thing is like, there's some degree of either intellectual interest or a deeper interest of like, what is George Harrison saying when he says, I really want to see you, Lord? That's a relatable feeling. There's a seeking that I would say, and it's not black and white. People in this movement may have had great suffering when they were coming to Krishna consciousness, but generally we also find they had some sense of, at least retroactively, they can look back and say, I have been looking, even if I didn't recognize it. I have been seeking for a long time. And some more and some less. Like some people we hear about, they're like a lot of Srila Prabhupada's followers, they were actively seeking. They were, and as soon as Srila Prabhupada manifested, or this Bhagavad Gita or Kirtan or a temple, they dropped everything, drop out of high school. Now here they are 50 years later, exalted devoted. Well, who knows what they were doing in their last life? Who knows what loka they descended from, these personalities. They've been seekers for such a long time. So we do find there's a spectrum. Somebody, was kind of seeking, but was mostly just trying to be happy in this world. And somebody who's like actively, their life is like a pilgrimage from the time they were young. So those 4 categories Krishna gives us in chapter 7. Again, I think it's verse 16.
16.
Yeah, they're the way of understanding the psychology of coming to Krishna consciousness, which I talked about a bit. I talked about, the Rahu period and people feeling alienated and suffering, and that's a motivator. But that's a short-term motivator. The deeper motivator is that we need a relationship with God, But until one recognizes that, they're usually pushed by more short-term considerations. So that's where those things come in. It takes a little purification to come to even the ability to recognize that I could have a relationship with God. If all you think about is like your next meal, that's your whole reality is consumed by that. God is very theoretical, right? So generally people, they're more kind of coarse and blunt before they become more refined and subtle and come in touch with their heart. And that could take many lifetimes. But generally, the ones who are really, really exclusively seeking have already exhausted a lot of the lower desires. They're already convinced more that sex is not going to do it, money's not going to do it, fame isn't going to do it, wealth, these things aren't going to do it for me or anybody. They're older souls. They're a little more convinced about what these messages of spiritual traditions are saying. And they're a little more like, directly or indirectly, like, I really need to see you, Lord. Where are you? Like Prahlad. That's an extremely high level, but I know lots of devotees who had some level of Prahlad where they're like, I'm not going to be happy without God. So, and then usually it's like a little bit of a fire is lit underneath them that, okay, I get an illness, or there's a divorce and someone breaks up with me. All of a sudden my mom dies or something, and it's like, oh yeah, what have I been doing? I've been forgetting my real goals to actually like. So it can be both. Sometimes there's a catalyst.
Thank you.
really interesting talking to devotees about their journey, because these are the kinds of things you can see.
Mhm.
And they'll tell you all about it.
Hmm.
Jai. Anyone else? Eileen, Martin, Nancy?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the class. And thank you for everything. I was just thinking that I have to keep on not working at it, but realizing that helplessness is not associated with despair. Helplessness can be great joy and great contentment, and that our society thinking helpless is a negative thing is in bhakti is not the case. It is actually a very joyous place to be. So it was a great class today. Thank you so much.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a classic thing where people kind of waffle back and forth between enjoyment and renunciation, karma and jnana. And so when they hear about bhakti, they just mistake it as the opposite of what they're already practicing, which for 99.9% of people is karma. So then they think bhakti is just renunciation, right? It's funny because the impersonalists who are actually practicing renunciation, they hear about bhakti and they think you guys are just like other material enjoyers. They see it as karma because they're stuck in that coin flip reality of it's black or it's white. They don't actually understand dedication. So, yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, I just appreciate what you said about the different like the helplessness can kind of manifest slightly differently depending on like it doesn't necessarily have to be this like extreme rock bottom like
Right.
you know all I have is this shirt left and like and I don't know where my next meal's coming like helplessness when it comes to like seekers and stuff like that. And I also appreciated your um description of like the universality of it all and just like it is truly the it is like that is like we are literally like that is what we are like it's like it doesn't matter like what
Yeah. It's our existential condition.
yeah it's like that is yeah it's that is our like yeah like our manifest like that's what we are here for is to
Yeah.
experience that
It's our dharma.
yeah
You can't run from
exactly
your dharma.
yeah
One meaning of dharma is that which sustains something, the essence that sustains something, right? So if you take the dharma away from something, it no longer becomes that thing. Prabhupada gives the example of the dharma of water is that it's wet. If it's not wet, it's not water anymore, right? If it freezes, it's no longer wet. It's not water. It's lost its dharma. It's essential. You cannot separate it without that thing becoming lost. Our dharma is that we're servants. Our dharma is that we're little givers of attention and we're maintained by the great. That's our dharma. That's always true. And so whether we're externally completely, destitute and dependent or not, and generally it's not, there's an existential sense of dependence and helplessness in the bhakti sense that's required for us to really lean into and learn about. Thank you. Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Srimati Kunti Devi and Pandavas ki jai. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Now let's offer our respectful obeisances to all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord who are just like desire trees. They can fulfill the desires of everyone and are full of compassion for all the fallen conditioned souls. Jai Vanchakalpatarapikascha Vasamtaviyevacha Adhyataram Vaishnavi Nandakoti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Have a great day, everyone.